So on my Instagram, my sister is like, in your display it reads, "I'm all in." What does that mean? First of all, I'm so ashamed that my family found me on the internet because I'm not close to them at all. So whatever she thinks I'm all in, how she interprets that is up for her own discretion. Similarly, the backdrop of anything is flat. If you don't like how that sounds, stop looking at a screen and try holographics. In a hologram, it needs a lens, and so its backdrop's the forefront. In a design of a backdrop or a forefront that's either made up of straight lines or circles. How do I know this? I saw it in a film class where a guy made the most generic film possible, and he ended up with just circles and lines for the backdrop. Looking in bones with microscopes, I thought today was Sunday, sorry. Looking in bones with microscopes, looking closely, you're gonna see they're made up of circles, these circular dynamics. But why is that important is because if you're making a makeup of a backdrop and it's all one thing, that would be a sloppy copy of a quantum mechanical machine, a 3D printer. Ladies and gentlemen, the definitive of a yield very much has to do with having all the ducks lined up in a row. This is what could be looked at as a whole bunch of lines, as we were talking about before. Have you ever seen gold bricks stacked up in a pyramid? This in 1D sense, it's just a whole bunch of lines. So if you're introducing a number line and a unit circle, you're going to be in really good condition. Another way of explaining what a yield is O-rings. Now these O-rings are actually really important because how they're put together down to the very fabric of its constituent has to do with what goes through and how much of it is going to be able to get through properly before it's blown. Have you ever blown a gasket? That's because an O-ring cracks, or a cylinder. And so when you have a turbine as well, that's like the opposite of an O-ring because it's doing the same thing in a circular motion, filling the gap. Your body coagulates parts that are lines and circles, and the more you can imitate that of what's good is actually going to be able to break the bank of any fat cat. Thanks for watching. The other exhibit I'd like to bring to your attention, other than a body that has been blunt force traumatized by a wire to the point of succumbing to its injury immediately, is one way of determining, instead of the weather, determining how dangerous it is to go outside. But it's free of liberty because you're supposed to be liable to go outside even if it's a tornado. It's just within your own detriment. How do you handle something that's extremely difficult? The first explanation. A triple encryption, almost like a triple filtrated water, is gonna take the smartest computer on planet Earth like 1 million years to decrypt. A quantum computer, because it has a quantum third option, you know, it can do one, the other, or both at the same time, is something that could decrypt a triple encryption probably overnight. And that's why it's that much importance to a science community to find a quantum computer of its most natural attributes, to use it for an advancement. It's almost as though, distasteful disclaimer, if a woman's yelling at you that she's pregnant, there's a massive difference if you're the person who caused it versus if you're a person just who are an outside source causing them a displeasure. It's an overbearing load if you just have an entire land full of cheaters, pumpkin eaters. The answer to empty space is that in every other space, it can't also be empty. Because the defiant of, one of my worst dreams is I saw this guy on the internet, he covers deaths, and he saw that this one guy had strung a string on a hill because he didn't like people riding their dirt bikes down it. And so everywhere I go, I'm thinking the worst way to go is to get hit by like a string that's been strung and it slices through your body. That's what happened to this one kid. He got decapitated on a bike because the string took his head off. If you hit a string going fast, it's gonna act like a blade. And this is how a cheese cutter, some of them you might see a wire and you just push it through the cheese and that's how it cuts. The same can be said with going quicker with a string. It has the same impact. But also if you have AC/DC current, the best way to pick up electricity is from every other space. If it's empty like dark energy is, then you're going to be able to rig it just like how cheaters rig things in their favor. The act of rigging is actually what allows for the connection of every other space, if it were empty, into how electricity works on a fundamental level with magnetic fields conducting electric ones. Cheating when you're replacing endpoints of solid state structures. Each state of the United States is supposed to be solidified structures, and when you're cheating, if you're voting, you're being smarter than what a watermark is. It isn't showing off. It's making an interstellar ability, the chance for us to go to the stars or do spacewalks without spacesuits. You're making the interstellar ability for anyone to achieve that back into the Stone Ages. So you're comparing like an interstellar just to like a small town that sucks. And that's like in relating someone's lung that has been scarred and injured from an impact, relating to just a snake that has one lung and that has a condition of asthma. Or another deficit is if you can't read your battery and then you can't tell that your laptop only works if it's plugged into an outlet or if it turns off automatically because you don't have an outlet. These are things that you could read if you had such a keen sensibility to read. You could look at like a chip if it was just used once or if it hadn't been at all. This is the art of watermarks, and something that people are trying to get a thumb on for better ways of Xing out detriments, such as people who would like to break the rules of looking at a door, you can't tell if it's locked. And in wind abrasion, if you go against the wind instead of with the wind, it can hurt that much more, because if you don't have feeling in your nervous system, you won't be able to tell that the wind's blowing that hard, especially if there's no trees or grass and it's just blowing in a direction and you're on a concrete everywhere. That would be a terrible way to get whiplash. And so one thing why windbreakers are so great is because they escape whiplash so it doesn't abrase. And whiplash is something with wind that's so fantastical that it doesn't need objects. It can be an invisible whiplash, and that's 10 times as detrimental because you're 10 times more lost from an invisible harm. So what can an embodiment encumber if the tone of the definition and its characteristics are taken for granted? it can be compromised and totally put out of frame. And if there's anything been put out of frame, who knows what is. This guy has a niche for being out of frame because I don't stare at screens or lenses when I'm speaking. One extreme outset of an electric component would be a solar flare. This is like when a star hiccups, it could reroute everything by the kinematic strike, and that's an extreme situation. So substation in electric equipment is something where it has a whole bunch of safeguards in order for it to not upkick something outside of the system that could influence it. This is the difference between capacities of something. This is the difference between something that has capacities that are smaller. So if you like compare a lung of a snake versus yours, it's double the difference because they only have one, plus it's extra small. Unless an adult lung is injured, and then it can be more comparable to something smaller.